So once again, we go back into the compassion wing of practice, and we saw there that at the foundation level, that involves cultivating these four qualities called the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity. So remember, loving kindness was the wish for ourselves and others to have happiness in its causes. Compassion was the wish for ourselves and others to be free of suffering and its causes. Empathetic joy was a rejoicing in our own and others' virtues and good fortune. And finally, this mind of equanimity was this mind of impartiality, not having attachment to friends, apathy to strangers, hostility, anger, hatred to difficult people, but a sense of closeness to everyone. And it's equanimity that allows the other three qualities of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy to expand out to all living beings, hence immeasurable. And it's equanimity also that is really the basis of beginning to cultivate this aspiration of bodhicitta that we looked at yesterday. So before we go back to our discussions on bodhicitta, and in particular this practice called Glen, what I'd like to do is to do a short 15-minute meditation on equanimity. So let's do that first. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. and setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the present moment, and simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Equanimity is a mind of impartiality towards others, not having attachment to friends, apathy to strangers, or hostility, anger, hatred to difficult people. It's equanimity that allows loving kindness and compassion to expand out boundlessly. Normally these qualities are mixed with attachment, but we grow beyond attachment as we realize that every living being is equally worthy of finding happiness and freedom from suffering. So first bring to mind a person who you know well, but is neither a friend nor someone who you dislike. And picture them very clearly in front of you. This person is just like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. And now shift your perspective and view the world through their eyes. And from this perspective, look back at yourself. Their wish for happiness and to be free of suffering is identical to your own. And even though they're not close to you, their happiness is no less significant than the happiness of a loved one. Next, bring to mind a person who you feel is crucial for your happiness. A person for whom you have both affection and attachment. And again, picture them very clearly in front of you. And then again, shift your perspective and view the world through their eyes. Being this person from the inside. A person who's just like yourself, with both qualities and faults. They have their own hopes, fears, and desires. Now step back and again view this person from the outside. This person is not the true source of your happiness. This can only come from within your own mind. Next, bring to mind a difficult person. A person who you dislike. And again, picture them very clearly in front of you. And again, assume this person's perspective. Being this person from the inside, experiencing their own hopes and fears. They are also just like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. And again, step back and view this person from the outside. This person is not the true source of your distress or anxiety. This can only come from within your own mind. And so realize that there's nothing inherent in a stranger, a loved one, or a difficult person that makes them that way. Circumstances change, and they can easily change from one category to another. A friend can become someone who you dislike, a stranger a friend, and even someone who you dislike can become a friend. Shifting circumstances bring us together and cause us to part. And recognize that everyone is fundamentally like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. And so arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if everyone had equanimity, free of attachment to friends, free of apathy to strangers, and free of hostility, anger or hatred toward difficult people. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. Simply resting in awareness itself. And so we saw there yesterday that these four measurables are really the compassion wing at the foundation level, and that in the Mahayana vehicle, so remember the Mahayana vehicle is the vehicle that can take us to the goal of enlightenment. These four measurables are built on to another level, and that is this aspiration of bodhicitta. So we saw there that bodhicitta, again a Sanskrit term, bodhi means enlightenment, chitta means mind. So bodhicitta is literally the mind of enlightenment. Again, the mind which aspires to enlightenment for the benefit of others. Because at the foundation level, we are striving for the goal of liberation from suffering through this aspiration called renunciation, which is really compassion for ourselves. But then we can understand, well, we're not the only ones in this situation. Everyone else is stuck in this state of dukkha. So then we can go on and develop this aspiration of not only wishing to liberate ourselves from suffering, but wishing to help liberate others from suffering. But then, of course, we understand that in our current state, we're not much help to anyone. We've got our own mental afflictions and suffering. So if we really want to be effective in helping others, then we really need to achieve full awakening, eliminate all of our mental afflictions and suffering, and fully develop our positive qualities. So that is enlightenment. So then we would go on to cultivate this aspiration of bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment, so we can help to liberate everyone else from suffering. And we saw there yesterday that traditionally there were two methods taught on how to cultivate that. First, there was the 7 cause and effect method, which was the main one taught. And then the second technique of equalizing and exchanging self with others. And it's the equalizing and exchanging self with others that we're spending more time on, because I think in the modern world, even though historically that approach was considered more difficult than the first one, but I think in our modern world that can be the one that's more effective. Because remember, the first one, to really do it well, it implies a belief in rebirth, and many of us don't have that. Whereas the second approach doesn't have that. And the second approach is really targeting directly the self-cherishing mind, the selfish, self-centered attitude, which I think is very strong in our modern world. So because it targets that directly, I think it can be a very effective method for cultivating bodhicitta. And we saw there yesterday that there were 5 steps in this process. First was equalizing self with others, which is very similar to this idea of equanimity we just looked at. To understand that we're all equal in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. And then on that basis, the next 2 reflections were to reflect on the disadvantages of self-cherishing and the advantages of cherishing others. Because superficially it could seem like this me, me, me attitude is what we need actually to be happy. And unfortunately our modern society tends to promote that. But when we reflect on that, this selfish attitude, we can see that it just brings suffering to ourselves and often to the people around us. And then we can see that the flip side of that, the mind of really cherishing others, is a source of happiness. So by reflecting on those 2 things, that will lead us to develop the aspiration to exchange or replace our self-cherishing mind with the mind of cherishing others. And that's the 4th step of exchanging self with others. That in daily life, whenever we see the selfish motivation coming up, is to reduce that as much as possible, to replace that with the mind of cherishing others as much as possible in all of our behaviour. And then the last step was, the 5th step was this Glen practice, giving and taking. And we've sort of done that practice already, the 2 halves in the loving kindness and compassion practice. But just to explain that a little bit more before we go and do that meditation. So what we're doing in this practice is we are imagining taking on the sufferings of others, and we're imagining giving our happiness away to them. And we do that in conjunction with the breath, and because that helps us to stay focused. So on the in-breath, we're taking suffering. On the out-breath, we're giving happiness. And this is a very powerful method because it really targets the selfish mind directly. Because the selfish mind, the last thing our selfish mind would want to do would be to take on any suffering from anyone. And the last thing the selfish mind would want to do would be to give away any happiness to anyone. So by mentally doing this, it's really weakening the self-cherishing and increasing the mind of cherishing others. And just like loving kindness and compassion, it's recommended we do this in stages. That traditionally, of course, we start doing this with friends. Once we're comfortable there, we expand out to people we don't know very well. Once we're comfortable there, we start to expand out to difficult people, and then eventually to all living beings. But again, I think in our modern world, where we don't tend to be very kind and compassionate to ourselves, that's where we need to start. So we can use the Glen practice to really cultivate loving kindness and compassion for ourselves first, and then expand that out to others. So there's a question.
On the step 3 and 4, we did a meditation yesterday, right?
On step 2, the disadvantages of self-cherishing.
Yes. 2 and 3?
2 and 3, yeah.
So what is 4?
4 is exchanging self with others.
Okay. Anyway, the meditation, you ask some questions. Can you tell us the question that I can do it to myself?
Yeah.
Like 3-4 points.
Yeah. So in that meditation, we looked at one. I mean, the first thing is really just to closely look at how selfish mind affects us. So the first part was to reflect on our own past experiences and bring to mind occasions where we had this selfish attitude, and then just see what effect did that have on us and the people around us. So that was the first step. Just bring some of those to mind to see really what impact the selfish mind really had on ourselves and others. And then I think the next point was, did that selfish mind ever cause us to be lonely or isolated? And another point was that by placing so much emphasis on ourselves, did that selfish mind ever lead to jealousy of others, competitiveness, and a sort of an arrogant, dismissive attitude towards others? In other words, did we show a lack of consideration and respect for others? And did that selfish mind ever cause us to hurt others who stood in the way of our happiness? And one other point is, with this me attitude and this obsessive focus on my happiness and my suffering, did that ever lead to any fear and anxiety about the world? Seeing everything as a potential threat? And did that ever lead to any strong craving and grasping to things that seem to be the source of our happiness? And there were some other points as well, but maybe that's enough.
Can you repeat the last one, please, again? That's the last
Very
one.
important, this one.
The last